gender, sexuality, tradition, business, and so much more. Hi, I'm Regina Gershman.
And I'm Dr. Sam Dubé. Together, we're going to take you on an extraordinary journey with engaging people from around the world, starting from right here in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. Hello, Dr. Sam Dubé here for the Etiquette Show, and I'm joined today with a special guest who is a local naturopath practicing in the West Village. Please welcome Dr. Ivy Branin. Ivy, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam.
It's our pleasure. Now, Ivy graduated with a degree in biochemical engineering with a minor in French. Alors, peut-être un jour, on fera une entrevue totalement en français, okay? Oh, there you have to prove you speak French, though. I know, I'm just teasing you. So she has a special interest in women's issues, and she gets a lot of allopathic physician, that is MD physician referrals. She's also worked in the pharmaceutical industry, so she has a unique vantage point for us here today. Ivy is a member of the American Association, the New York Association, and the Pediatric Association of Naturopathic Physicians, and she also is a board member for the Association of Perinatal Naturopathic Doctors. So, Ivy, quick question for you. Your background in chemical engineering and your background as a chemical engineer, how does that or did that influence your approach to health and wellness?
That's a really great question. And often people think that because I have like this more traditional science background, that it's in conflict with naturopathic medicine, which I would say is so far from the truth. And the big things I would say as far as like how that background has influenced me is one, it sounds a little bit strange, but I view the human body in some ways as a factory, and a big part of being an engineer is working on scale up and looking at factory and looking at how things interact and are produced. And so as with my engineering background, like really acting as like a problem solver for my patients. So, I mean, it sounds like a little bit, I don't want to say harsh, viewing a human body as a machine, but we are very much machines. And with my engineering background, I've been able to really understand what is going on physiologically and where things are going wrong, and making really good logical decisions on helping my patients naturally. The other big part of my background is like I've always been very comfortable reading scientific journals, looking at research, using research to make the best decisions for my patients. And then the other big part, I'd say, well, it's like both, specifically because my practice is based in New York. New York people are very skeptical. They want proof. They want science. And so because I have the background I do, I feel that I'm really able to explain things to my patients in a whole other way that perhaps somebody who didn't have my background would be able to. And then the other big part, it definitely gives me some credibility when talking to medical doctors, because as you mentioned before, I do get a lot of referrals from medical doctors, and I think because they do feel comfortable with me, and I also refer to them, and I'm able to talk about my cases on probably a higher level than someone who didn't necessarily also have the engineering background.
Wow, that's great. You are the founder of SimplicityHealthAssociates.com website, and you also maintain and write a blog there. And I noticed you wrote several articles on dealing with health and wellness during the pandemic. So just to contextualize this interview, this is mid-March of 2021. So we're technically still during the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is run roughshod over the world, and in particular New York City, and you reside in New York City and you practice in the West Village. So, you know, your people are very close by, and you've written on various topics. So I'm going to name out some topics, and I'd love for you to discuss and bring to light your key points. So for instance, diet and nutrition. What are some of the key points you would like our viewers, particularly for in Manhattan, for the Etiquette Show today, what would you like them to bring home with them? Or if they're already at home, to bring with them?
Well, first of all, as a naturopath, nutrition is so fundamental to what we do. And thinking about the time we're still during COVID, and not just even considering the virus, but how many people, because of regulations, we're spending so much more time at home. Some of the key aspects for nutrition are, definitely considering our immune system and foods that are really going to support our immune system. Also really dealing a lot with anxiety and stress. So what are some of the ways or the key foundations of building a healthy diet that is going to support all three? The biggest foundation, hands down, in my opinion, is making sure that my patients have access to vegetables and incorporating a lot of vegetables, because vegetables are a great source of vitamins and minerals. Many of these are really important for both immune health and stress. And so some of the main ways, specifically during the pandemic, even frozen is fine. So access to fresh and frozen vegetables, kind of making that foundation. If you think about like the whole plate, having about half the plate about having vegetables. The other big key component, again, because like thinking about stress in particular, making sure having high quality proteins, and these could be both animal derived, like lean meats, specifically grass-fed meats are very high in omega-3 fatty acids, fish, chicken, but also vegetarian sources for patients that are, or people that are vegetarian, eggs, and then foods that are also, so then either grains or starches that are high in fiber. And again, one of the big components of some of these is the idea around blood sugar regulation and keeping balanced blood sugars, which is definitely going to be helpful, one, in our immune system, because having too much sugar or having too many spikes in insulin is going to have negative impact on our immune health, but also going to give us more problems when it comes to anxiety and stress and sleep. And so even like when we think about foods, even to sort of not to really have in the house, specifically during the pandemic, are foods really high in sugar, so candies and sweets, obvious things, and then our refined carbohydrates, the crackers and the chips. And specifically with patients or people that are more wired towards emotional eating, having these types of foods readily available in the house. I even put in that same category, like breakfast cereals. I actually think breakfast cereals, unfortunately, is one of the worst things to have in our homes. So all these foods can be fodder for binging, which is going to be causing all kinds of crazy insulin spikes, going to be causing more anxiety, causing more stress, issues around sleep, and also immune system. So I really feel that, the foundation, vegetables, protein, high fiber carbohydrates, some fruits, and healthy fats.
Okay, I have a few questions for you regarding this. So number one, organic versus non-organic. And one of the reasons why I ask is because you hear some medical authorities saying, oh, it doesn't make a difference. And especially for something like an avocado, because the skin is so thick, the pesticides can't get in. So then I go and I compare organic and non-organic avocados. And with my organic avocados, they ripen very slowly. They ripen evenly. But then I go and I get the non-organic ones. They sit on my counter. They're totally not ripe. I turn my back for a second to get the phone. I turn around and the thing's rotted. Do you know what I mean? It's like, just like that fast. So what's your take on organic versus non-organic produce? And does it matter?
So I'd say yes and no and no. or the classic doctor answer, it depends. And also when we're thinking about what the food is for, so for the most part, overall, well, I guess it's like both, what is the food for? And then really thinking about two different components when it comes to organic and non-organic, and the big one being chemical pesticides that are going to be problematic. So first, considering, the benefit over organic versus non-organic is decreased toxic load. Though within that scope, there are definitely some non-organic produce that either pesticides aren't normally used, or they have a lower toxic burden. And every year, the Environmental Working Group posts what they call the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So foods or produce that are on the Dirty Dozen list tend to have very high toxic load from pesticides, and that can cause all kinds of issues, and that might be a whole other show. So definitely avoiding those foods. And I don't have like the whole list memorized in my head, so you can always go to the website. Absolutely. And then the clean 15, these are foods, and typically usually avocado tends to be, avocado is usually on the clean 15, as is bananas. So there's certain produce that tend to always be on the clean 15, and then the Dirty Dozen usually always has apples. No one should be eating a non-organic apple. So that's the first issue, is it going to be causing me some sort of level of toxicity? And are there some that are safe? Because again, thinking about some people have different budgetary restraints. Then the other argument towards organic versus non-organic is nutrient complexity. And so for the most part, the organic tend to be much more nutrient rich. But, the sad nature of our current planet is that even if you're eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, most people are still going to be more or less at some level nutrient deficient, just because our soil, that's one of the sad realities. So typically I usually steer, again, when we're thinking about just from like making a decision. So definitely choose, if you're choosing foods, if they're on the Dirty Dozen, you definitely want to choose organic, clean 15. I'd say it depends. Obviously also, we all have different palates, and then sometimes the organic one is definitely the tastier choice, and there is a lot to be said for things naturally ripening on Mother Nature's time versus like this kind of crazy chemically induced way. And then I guess I don't know if this is a little bit too much, but one of the things that we have here, not just in New York, but nationwide, there's two companies. One is called Misfits Market, and the other is Imperfect. And both of these companies, basically, they're selling produce that is kind of like how it sounds. They're a little bit odd. They just don't fit like the perfect norm, but they're perfectly nutritious. And with these subscription plans, whether you're doing it once a week or every other week, it usually only equates to about anywhere from like $50 to $100 a month, which is pretty decent actually for organic produce. And then I guess like the last little thing about the whole debate between organic and non-organic, of course, organic sells. So just because a processed food has the label organic, yes, technically probably all the there are some specific guidelines around labeling, so most likely the majority of the components are organic, but organic potato chips are no more healthy than non-organic. The other thing that there is, I actually worked a little bit on an organic farm when I was in naturopathic school, and one of the other things is that it costs money to actually become organic certified. So some farms may be, so sometimes like to get like that distinction does cost some money. And so some of these farms that actually are like 100% technically organic might not have that distinction. And so just again, that there are some local farms in your neighborhood, and not your neighborhood, but New York, but in certain parts of the country could actually have organic quality foods, but unfortunately because of pricing, they cannot use that as a label, so they might say like organic and you can always also talk to the farmer and ask about like what are you using for pesticides and what are you using for fertilizers.
Okay, great. Now, apart from the two resources that you already mentioned, are there any other local resources that people in New York City can take advantage of regarding the organic produce?
Well, we have lots of farmers markets all over the city.
Okay.
And then, of course, we have, again, like if we're thinking about if cost is an issue. So in addition, we now actually have more and more, we have Whole Foods, like I think almost like in every single neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And I know that sometimes they get the label as like whole paycheck, but now, I mean, I hate to say it, but like now that they've been bought out by Amazon, they tend to actually have some pretty good deals, and specifically also on some of their frozen organic produce. And then we also have Trader Joe's,
Okay.
which also offers a lot of organic choices at a relatively reasonable cost.
Okay. Another question for you. You mentioned in one of your blogs the role of carbohydrates versus depression. Now, especially with all this talk about ketogenic, and I myself, I try to go through cycles of eating keto and non-keto and the Paleolithic diet. I don't even have bread in my house, right? Because I'm going to do exactly what you said, right? I'm just going to eat it. But there is some usefulness to eating carbohydrates, and you talk about the role of carbohydrates and serotonin production. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So specifically, when it comes to having some carbohydrate at night, does help with the release of tryptophan. And so tryptophan is one of the precursors of serotonin. And there have been studies showing that people that ingest, it doesn't have to be a lot of, I think the big thing is that people just eat way too many carbohydrates, and that's really not going to be very beneficial, specifically because no one is really active at all but having some carbohydrate before bed really can help to boost up serotonin. In fact, actually even in the following day, actually reducing the craving towards carbohydrates. So one of our big why we do crave carbohydrates, well, there's a couple different reasons. Obviously, our brains are fueled on glucose, and so it's definitely an evolutionary advantage, but also a big part is because many of us have lower levels of serotonin for various reasons. I mean, as you had mentioned before, my practice is mostly focused on women, and some women that specifically have more depressive-like symptoms at the later part of their cycle. A lot of this has to do with serotonin dysregulation, and these women also are the ones that usually will say, like, I'm like binging, I'm eating all these I'm eating chocolate, all these kinds of things at the later part of the cycle. And then one little last thing, and specifically, again, because I practice mostly women, having some carbohydrate is also really important for thyroid production, reproductive production. Regulate specifically because I do work a lot with women who have what's called HPA amenorrhea, hypothalamic amenorrhea, and for these women to not have carbohydrates is going to cause them to lose their period.
Right.
And if you're not, our female hormones, when they get dysregulated, so do our moods, so do all our other vital processes. So in some cases, having some healthy carbohydrates that are high in fiber, of course, in moderation, but probably every day, is mostly beneficial.
Right. And, you're certainly not the first authority I've heard mention that, a ketogenic diet may not be ideal for women on a long-term basis, because of what it can do to the hormones. Quick question for you then. I was going to ask you about probiotics, staying on the same page. So probiotics for the general population, and in particular for women. If you could elaborate on that.
So probiotics, specifically, we're also even thinking about like this immune system. So probiotics are very important for immune health. And there's so much studies on the microbiome and how our gut bacteria and what is residing in us. In fact, actually, as humans, we are more foreign cells, basically, because bacteria, are cells. We are more foreign cells than human cells. And there's so much interesting research from even where they'll take the stool of an obese mouse and they put it in a thin mouse, and the thin mouse gets obese, and then vice versa. So definitely the makeup of our microbiome has an influence on metabolism. It also has an influence on specific certain autoimmune conditions. I had a patient with rheumatoid arthritis quite a few years ago, and she responded quite positively towards some probiotic therapies I was putting her on. It was actually specific. There's just specific strains that tend to be deficient in rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh,
and
interesting.
by giving the patient some of these probiotics can definitely improve. In the case of women in particular, vaginal flora, so important for preventing things like urinary tract infections, yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, and so much that women do, unfortunately, depletes or disrupts that vaginal flora, whether it's eating a high sugar, high refined carbohydrate diet, alcohol, even some sexual activity can have a big impact, hormonal changes, whether due to taking a birth control pill, whether it's due to menopause. So making sure to have probiotics specifically with lactobacillus rhamnosus and lactobacillus reuteri can really do a lot in prevention. So I'll often have a woman not just even take it orally, but she'll also do a vaginal insertion to really help to really boost the flora. And, it's definitely, there's all kinds of probiotics, and I could talk also about all the different brands and different formulas. But the other big thing is that you can definitely get a lot of incorporating fermented foods on a daily basis can really, really help. And whether that's sauerkraut, kimchi, if you tolerate dairy, although we have so many non-dairy versions of these things like yogurt and kefir, though, being very mindful that a lot of the commercial prepared yogurts and kefir have a lot of sugar, often more sugar than even ice cream, or about the same. You might as well just eat some ice cream. So making your own is even better, or buying plain versions. And if you want a little bit of sweetness, adding some fruit or adding a little bit of maple syrup or honey yourself, because the commercial ones, my goodness, that's a lot of sugar.
A lot of sugar. Regarding the probiotics as well, I know when I was a medical resident, I would recommend probiotics and omega-3 fatty acids, particularly marine source fish oil, for mild to moderate depression, and had some fantastic results, right? So can you speak to that as well? Because I know you're fully aware of that.
Yeah. So, the big thing when we think about probiotics and mood disorders, so sometimes the gut has a nickname, the second brain. And a couple of things about our gut. Actually, the majority of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut. So definitely the bacteria residing there is going to have a big influence on serotonin, but also even stress response. And the big thing is that our brain talks to our gut, but our gut also talks to our brain. And a lot of it has to do with the bacteria that is residing. Also, what the bacteria have an influence on absorption of certain nutrients, and nutrients are really some specific nutrients, things like magnesium, B vitamins, really important for production of neurotransmitters. And how you even mentioned fatty acids from fish oils, the bacteria in our gut also have an influence on the absorption of fatty acids. So there's so much that the gut bacteria can do with mood. And that's always one thing I always look for when I'm working with a patient who's struggling with anxiety and depression, is making sure that they're getting on the right probiotic. And then even just when we think about the just proper bowel health can have an effect on mood. And then the other interesting thing, and I'm working on a patient, unfortunately, who has been suffering a lot right now, but a lot of our mood stabilizing medications have a big effect on our gut.
Yes.
Whether it can be slowing things down, speeding things up, and that's just something else to really consider.
Okay, that's really good. And you know what? I like that we're spending a lot of time on nutrition, because it's one of the big cornerstones of naturopathic medicine, in fact. So we can say, is there anything else you would like to add in the diet/nutrition realm? Because I have a couple more questions regarding that for you. Any other key points that you'd like to bring up to our New York City audience?
Well, I'd say also, because we were talking, because one thing that I learned early on when I started my practice here in New York about 10 years ago, New Yorkers don't cook. And that was like really hard for me. And it was for a couple of reasons. One, New Yorkers just sometimes don't even have kitchens. I literally have had patients that have not had a kitchen. And so I have had to learn about all the healthy prepared options that we have in the city that are still available even during COVID. A few specific restaurants that offer delivery that Sweet Greens, which is a salad style restaurant, Dig In, which offers like decent proteins with veggie sides, very veggie focused. We also have Little Beat, which is very similar kind of concept to kind of like almost like hybrid of both of those. And then we actually have a paleo restaurant, which has 2 locations. I'm thinking still. One is not too far from my office in the kind of like the West Village Union Square area, and then there is one on the Upper East Side. And all these places deliver, which is great because, again, I hate to say that New Yorkers don't like to cook, but they don't. And so those are like they're decent options specifically because they also cater towards different dietary restrictions. And then we also have things like Kettlebell Kitchen, Cook Unity. There's a lot of different subscription services that people can use because if you don't like to cook, you can still eat healthy if you use these choices.
Right. Okay. That's good to know. Now, another cornerstone of naturopathic medicine is botanicals. And we can include that with nutrition as well. Are there any botanical points you'd like to bring up? Any recommendations, any concerns, anything that you think would be relevant to health and wellness during COVID or just health and wellness in general you'd like to get out there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I mean, if we're thinking, because obviously probably some people watching this are very much interested in immune support and immune health. And I think that there's so much good information and there's bad information on the internet. But when I'm thinking both from a preventative, and again, I'm not going to say I have any recommendations as far as if you have COVID and treating COVID, but from a preventative standpoint, I'm very much a fan of medicinal mushrooms for immune support. And there's been very, very good research. Also, I guess another thing I'd like to point out about herbs in general, I rarely prescribe herbs as singulars. I usually prescribe formulas, whether I'm making them or I'm using prepared formulas. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But for the most part, herbal formulas tend to be more appropriate. So with the medicinal mushrooms, definitely using a product that has a variety of different mushrooms. 2 brands that I tend to lean towards, I really like the Host Defense, which was created by Paul Stamets, who's like has done amazing research. He's put out some really good blends and singular mushroom products. And the big reason why mushrooms in particular could be really helpful is their ability to help support interferon gamma and CD8 cells. And again, this is still, I mean, all the research, I think, even with COVID is so new, but a lot of the studies are showing that those 2 are kind of like the decision-making factors, specifically when we're looking at patients that didn't have pre-existing conditions who were not necessarily they're in their 30s or 40s, that seems to be the big differentiator between those that just had like a mild case of COVID and those that became gravely ill or even ended succumbing to COVID is the CD8 cell ability and count and the release of interferon gamma seem to be, those are the big differentiators. So medicinal mushrooms, most of them have been shown to have a positive influence on both of those markers. Again, I'm not going to say like that's going to save you, but it's just something else to really consider when it comes to herbs for immune support. And then the other things I would think about too is like, this has been obviously a very stressful time. And so adaptogenic herbs, and also most adaptogenic herbs do have an influence on the immune system. So things that I would think would be really...
Like ginseng, I believe that was the first substance categorized as an adaptogen in the Eastern Bloc many years ago. Yeah.
Yes. And in my practice, I tend to prescribe a lot of adaptogens, and my approach is very much specific to the patient. So it could be a little bit harder doing it yourself, but, the adaptogens I'm thinking of that would be specifically really pertaining to this time. I love rhodiola, ashwagandha, ginseng. There's been so much research on ginseng, and just because an herb hasn't been thoroughly researched doesn't necessarily mean that it's a valuable herb. There's a little bit of politics when it comes to things that get researched and things that don't. But there has been so much research done on ginseng on all different things. In fact, actually, I gave a talk last month on sexuality after menopause, and just like all the positive benefits when it comes to libido and with using ginseng. So I said rhodiola, astragalus. So astragalus is another one that has a positive influence actually on interferon gamma. So it has both like the adaptogen quality, but then also has the immune support adaptogenic quality. Also has a affinity for the kidney health. When we think about also like vitamin D, we activate vitamin D our kidneys. So we really want to support our kidneys as much as possible. Licorice is great. I love Eleutherococcus for other people. I don't tolerate Eleutherococcus, but that is one of my often Siberian ginseng, which is one of my my go-tos. And then the other would be, most people would benefit from, specifically women, liver supportive herbs. So things like milk thistle, yellow dock, artichoke, bitter herbs, tend to be also really, one, supportive for the liver, supportive for digestion, supportive for the skin. So having a formula that has some liver support, but has sort of like a bitter component, I think would be really beneficial right now, because also we were talking before about the mood effects. When we're really stressed, when we're anxious, our digestion gets thrown off. So by having a formula that has some bitter-like quality can help to really support bringing that facilitating digestion.
Three of the big ones for immune support and general health and well-being are vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. Do you have any comments to make regarding, any suggestions in particular regarding those three?
Sure. So it's like almost like three different kind of parts. So, definitely all of these are really helpful for preventative, and then often in higher dosages during an active infection. A couple things, definitely when it comes to vitamin C, so typically I usually, during an active infection, I'll dose it anywhere from like 500 to 1,000, 3 to 4 times a day. The big thing with vitamin C, you can't technically overdose on it, but if you take too much for your body, you're going to get diarrhea. Something to note. Zinc, really for the effectiveness, typically I'll usually recommend 15 to 30 milligrams for prevention, and then possibly 3 to 4 times a day during that dosage during an active infection. Zinc, so whenever we're trying to increase minerals, they really should be more often than not taken away from food, because there's a lot of competition with other minerals or other substances in foods. So to optimize zinc, I typically recommend patients to take it on an empty stomach about an hour away from food. I have had a lot of sensitive patients in my practice. I tend to attract a lot of them. And so if you're somebody who gets a little bit queasy with zinc, having a little bit of like maybe a few slices of banana or some applesauce should help to counteract the nausea without impacting the absorption. Other thing also to note about zinc, it can have an influence. Well, so both copper and zinc influence each other's absorption. So if you have too much zinc, it could potentially affect your copper, so you might also want to supplement with some copper. I'm actually seeing this more. One of copper's functions is activating iron, so basically allowing, so a patient could have like really decent ferritin levels, so which is basically stored iron, but if their circulating iron is low, then I suspect possible that there could be a possible copper deficiency or not having enough copper. So that's just something to also consider. And then also just another nutrient that has a big influence also on zinc would be vitamin A. So vitamin A and zinc tend to go very well together.
Okay.
And then the last one, vitamin D. So vitamin D, I mean, I guess probably most people are deficient, but the big thing is, in my practice, I don't recommend, or I base my recommendation on vitamin D dosage on what my patients' vitamin D levels are. So typically, I want my patients at above 50 is more optimal, even though if you get, I think now the bottom is 32, I believe, or it's 30. It's either 30 or 32. I should.
And these are American units for those
right,
of you watching.
American
They're
units.
the American units, all right.
So if I have a patient who's below 30 and it's the winter months, I usually will dose anywhere from like 4,000 to sometimes even 10,000 if they're very, very low during the winter months.
Right.
And then I typically will want to reevaluate in about 3 months, and also when you get reevaluated, or both when you get evaluated the first time and the second time, definitely don't take your vitamin D during that time because you could have a false elevation. But I definitely tend towards only dosing it when I know definitively what their levels are at. So a couple of reasons for that, because one, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so we actually can overdose on it, and it can be toxic to the liver. It can be toxic, also having a negative impact on calcium levels, meaning having them go up too high. So it is something you have to be careful with. I don't want anyone to be afraid of it, but it's just something definitely to consider. And then the other thing about vitamin D is most people will definitely need some during the winter months because we don't really absorb any vitamin D. Even if you go out midday, buck naked, you're not going to be absorbing. Similarly, even in the summer, though you can absorb vitamin D in the summer, it doesn't count if you're wearing sunscreen. It doesn't count if you're inside the house or in a car, fully clothed. You really do need to have proper exposure for about like 10 to 15 minutes without sunscreen. And then you can put your sunscreen right on because you don't want to get skin cancer, but it's just something else to note. And when it comes to specifically some of the research that has come out regarding vitamin D and COVID, I don't necessarily believe that more is better because most of the studies are really just showing that deficiency in vitamin D increases the likelihood of both, I think, contracting COVID and not being able to properly fight it off. So I don't necessarily, I mean, I could be wrong and maybe there'd be more research and maybe the research has come out. I haven't really seen anything indicating that those who are normal level vitamin D, if taking more vitamin D on top of that, is going to improve outcomes. So that's just another, I mean, again, this is just based on what I know today and things could definitely change, but it seems like more that a deficiency increases the likelihood, not necessarily that having more than you need of vitamin D is going to help improve outcomes.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Ivy. You talked about getting outside and getting sufficient sunlight to manufacture sufficient vitamin D, and that's a big issue here. Let's use that as a segue to the other dangers of being indoors during the pandemic. So you talked a lot about and mentioned things that I find other medical authorities don't emphasize, and that is exposing oneself to the environment, to microbes, to other viruses, to things that actually prime and keep your immune system strong. Can you address this issue? Because it's something you often don't hear about. one of the kind of the unspoken dangers of being isolated, not only with the air quality and the restricted environment, but from other people. Can you talk to this?
Oh, I mean, yeah, this is like, we're such like this like catch-22 kind of thing right now, because we're isolating, as you mentioned before, from others. We're taking a lot of precautions. We're cleaning our hands more. We're using a lot of disinfectants. We're just basically becoming more sterilized. And there's definitely a reason for that, because I don't think any of us really want to catch COVID or run the risk of catching COVID. But then there's definitely another side to that. And like, what are we doing to our protective microbiome? What are we doing to our immune system? And one of the things that we think about specifically, being in more of a sterilized type of environment, there's this idea of the hygiene hypothesis. Again, these are all still theories. Anything I say is probably just based on a theory. But one of the things that we have found is that those that tend towards these more sterile-like environments have an uptick in things like allergies and autoimmune diseases. And I'd almost like to say, like in a very simplistic way, it's as if we're not readily allowing some pathogens in, some like friendly basic pathogens and bacteria in, our immune system kind of gets bored. We have two different, I'm not going to talk too much about the two different T helper, the 1 and the 2, and so much about that. But, without this steady influx of some of these kind of dirty like things, we do run the risk of more allergies and more autoimmune conditions. Now, again, it's hard to say if only doing a whole year of this is going to have so much of an influence. But I mean, it technically could. And so potentially some of these workarounds, because yes, I guess, we need to we have to take precaution, but if we have the opportunity to go to the woods, for example, whether it's like, we get into our car, and we drive upstate. Actually, and the amazing thing about New York City is, we're only actually a train ride away, like about like a 45-minute train ride to, it's called Cold Spring. And there's like, you can literally get off the train and start hiking, which is kind of amazing. If you feel comfortable with that, I mean, during this time. But of course, if you don't, you can always like rent a car or get a car. But getting outside, being in nature, even if it's just you by yourself, I'd actually something I'd be kind of curious about. I wonder if people that had animals during the pandemic, animals are dirty.
They're doing better, are less hygienic, and invoking the hygiene theory of immunity, perhaps.
Right. So I don't know if that would offer some support. I mean, one of the nice things, specifically having a dog, is it really forces one to go out. You really don't have an option. I mean, unless like you live, I guess, have like a big backyard and you're one of those dog owners that just has your dog out there outside. But here in New York, not too many people have backyards, so like you definitely have to be out and back. And actually, that was a big thing that some people have been doing during this pandemic, is actually fostering dogs, which is kind of a beautiful thing. And
not just with pets, but what about children? Like if you let children out or you have children, does that prime your immunity even more? That'd be interesting because, my mom never got sick, right? Because moms never have time to get sick, but they're always, being exposed to all kinds of things that my brother and I were bringing in. I mean, you want to talk about rolling around in the dirt, like we were eating dirt, back in the day, right? So that's a really interesting research idea, Ivy. Maybe we can collaborate or do a field study or something. Right. That'd be kind of cool. I also want to talk about screen time, because you mentioned this in one of your blogs, screen time and the air quality. And you also talk about headaches and what may be causing headaches for people being isolated indoors. So can we address these? So about screen time. People, I mean, look at us. We're on Zoom right now, right? We're on Zoom right now. So here's some screen time clips. So what are the consequences of all this overt screen time?
Well, as you mentioned before, headaches, and both, I'd say definitely the screen time and the air quality have a big influence. in the screen time, on headaches. And when we think about almost like our screen time has changed since the pandemic. So, if you were somebody who was working in a typical office-like setting, yes, you'd be on your computer. And like, I also was on my computer when I was in my office because I use electronic charting like most medical doctors use. But it wasn't like
right.
staring at it like all the time.
I'll meet you head to head.
Often luckily I'm really good at typing, but like I could type and not even look at my screen for the most part. But so now we're so much more fixated on our screens, both during work and then maybe our social time, like having these like happy hours on Zoom, all these things on Zoom, plus obviously also like our other gadgets, things like our tablets and there's so many reasons why excess of screen time could result in headaches. First of all, if we're just thinking about ergonomics and posture, people that were working in an office prior to the pandemic, they probably had a fancy chair. They probably had a very fancy cush setup. I'm hoping, maybe not. And so if our environment isn't conducive to proper posture, proper alignment, that's going to have a big influence on headaches because, again, like we're thinking about like all the different muscles, like having being tense. These are going to have influence on the other muscles, and that's going to definitely be resulting potentially in headaches. And then our eyes have muscles.
Yes.
And if we're fixated, and there is basically this idea that for every few that just staring off briefly, taking these breaks, either for every 5-10 minutes, make sure that you're looking off, or even just physically getting up, walking around.
Accommodation.
Yes.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, that's for sure. Now, what about air? And I want to ask an extension to that as well. So air quality in your apartment or otherwise in your home in during the isolation. Can you comment to that?
Sure. So believe it or not, even though, yes, I live in New York City, the air quality in most of our homes is worse than outside. In fact, actually, I think I read an article, was it last year? I think it was in the New Yorker, just about how toxic the air quality is in our homes in comparison with the outside. And one of the factors that even makes it worse is our homes have become more and more sealed off. And the reason being, there's definitely an economic benefit, and I guess the environment also benefits from it, is it makes our homes more efficient. We don't need to turn on the heat as high, or we don't need to turn the air conditioning on as high, because nothing is seeping out. There's nothing coming out of the windows. And so basically the air is just being entrapped. And even if you're I don't have any kind of traditional toxic chemicals that I'm spraying around. I tend much more towards all green products for dishes and cleaning my home. But even every time I cook, I'm releasing lots and lots of toxins. And I'm really changing it for lighting candles, all the kinds of things that we're spraying around, using in our homes, it's kind of debatable whether or not, specifically you're in a very sealed environment, how much, because every time we breathe, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. I don't know exactly how much of that carbon dioxide would be building up, but that also could even have a big disruption even in our sleep quality. And if we think about poor sleep in general can be associated with headaches. Actually, a lot of our environment can affect our sleep in a negative way, specifically the breathing of our sleep, which if you're somebody who is, even if they feel like they've had a full night's sleep and they're waking up with this excruciating headache or having very much dry mouth, one thing that could definitely be to blame could be air quality. Plus also a big factor here in New York City, many of us don't live in we don't have the luxury of completely having control over the temperature of our homes. And so some of these older buildings have extremely strong heat, which I guess we're somewhat grateful for because when it's really cold, but it's causing very much dry air quality. And if our air is very dry, that's going to just basically dry out our nasal passages. So things like adding things like a humidifier, even better if you're able to add maybe potentially some antibacterial essential oils or things that are going to kind of open up the passages. But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, our environment's pretty toxic. Some of the workarounds is definitely opening the windows. I know sometimes it can be difficult, specifically in the colder seasons, but at least once in a while, make sure to open up the window and getting outside, even if it's only for 5 or 10 minutes.
What about the use of humidifiers, dehumidifiers, and ionizers?
Well, so they all have different, so things that are actually pure. So a humidifier and a dehumidifier, neither are they'll affect the environment,
right,
or the moisture environment, but they're not necessarily going to really have an effect on air quality or remove any kind of toxins. So that's more, thinking about having some sort of like HEPA filter, buying filter, an ionizing unit, but again, the other two definitely much more all about just moisture regulation.
Right. Dr. Ivy, we're approaching the end of our episode here, but I have to tell you, you are a wealth of information, and I'm not going to let this sit. So what I'd like to do is I would like to continue this interview. So I want to notify our viewers, this is now part 1 of our interview with New York City naturopath in the West Village, Dr. Ivy Branin. And what we're going to do is we're going to sign off right here, and we're going to keep going. And so stay tuned, pay attention for the part 2 of the New York City naturopath discusses health and wellness during the pandemic. Dr. Ivy Branin discusses all of this with Dr. Sam Dubé of the Etiquette Show.
Hi guys, this is Celia reporting to you in the heart of New York City in the beautiful Times Square with the Etiquette Show. Today we're going to find out how single New Yorkers feel about dating during the pandemic and what trends they have been noticing. Hi guys, this is Celia with the Etiquette Show, and with me I have
Max Acosta.
Lucero Acosta. And how has Corona impacted your love life?
I don't really have a love life, but just in general, I love my family and friends. Not being able to be close to them or express affection, love and affection in a physical way by hugging, by being close, looking at each other in the eye. It just feels distant and isolated.
I remember, he's my brother, so I remember when we went to our sister's house to see our niece and nephew, and we were able to hug them. So that was really sad because we used to, as a family, we're always hugging each other. So it's very hard not to hug them and not to be able to celebrate our birthday together like we used to. So it has an impact for us more in the family than our partners,
And then before pre-coronavirus, it used to be exciting and fun being close to one another, whereas now it's scary and anxiety inducing. I'm scared of people being like close to each other. We shouldn't be that way.
No, that's so true. Like, we all deserve to be close to one another, Yeah. So, how was your love life before the pandemic?
I would say, physical contact is important in like human. That part was taken away from us. It does feel like strange and lonely.
How about people that got the vaccine, though?
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah!
That's very exciting. Hopefully, everyone will be vaccinated by December and things will go back to normal.
I mean, you guys can have your whole family, you guys can have birthdays together and everything else, so
I'm looking forward to the time, especially elections.
Yeah, the elections. Is there anything else you guys want to share? No. Okay, well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Hi, guys. This is Celia with the Etiquette Show, and with me, I have
Asia, sorry.
It's okay. And how has Corona impacted your love life?
Lord, my love life.
She's a lordy.
Well, I mean, I gave coronavirus to my boyfriend. So. Well, we had it for a whole month. But
Yeah.
it's all good now.
And was he mad or upset?
No, he just wanted to take care of me, so.
Oh, that's so sweet. You gave it to him, but he still cared about you.
Yeah, he did.
I hope y'all get married. That's love.
I hope so. A year and a half, so.
So were you guys one of the couples that had to spend more time or less time together?
In the beginning, I would have to say more time, but then because, coronavirus and the economy and stuff, we both lost our jobs, so we had to move to another state.
When's he coming back?
Yeah, never.
What do you mean?
No, he wants me to move to PA with him, so I'm thinking about doing that.
Alright.
Yeah.
What kind of... Do you wish that he could move here?
He doesn't want to move back here.
Why? It's so nice here. This is New York. Look at it.
He's been here all his life. He just wants to move, so...
And how do you feel about that?
I don't really blame him. Like, I kind of want to move too.
Yeah.
So,
And what would you contribute to your relationship working out so well?
Communication, like that's just the best way to keep right now to, keep a healthy relationship. Only communication.
No, that's true. Well, I have one last question. Most couples, they fought more because they have to spend more time together. Most people, when they have to go through distance, they go through challenges. So, what has helped you guys the most throughout those challenges?
Oh, Lord. Honestly, we faced more challenges than I even expected throughout this, whole experience with the coronavirus and within our relationship.
Yeah.
I know that our communication was really bad, but, throughout time it got better.
Yes.
If you want to be with somebody for a long time, then that's the only thing that we had a problem with was communication.
And I'm glad it seems like you guys both grew throughout your problems and just got better and better.
Right, yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And there you have it. This is Celia reporting to you in Times Square. Now back to you in the studio.
I know. This is awesome. Oh.